So the four subcommittees are farmer and processor education and outreach, supply chain and market development, research opportunities and needs, and policy and regulation. Those are the four areas that the steering committee itself decided to focus on.
That's Dr. Ron Kander, engineering professor and a whole lot of other things at Jefferson University. And now he's also the chair of the leadership team of the Pennsylvania Hemp Steering Committee. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today I'll talk to Dr. Kander about the steering committee, its goals and challenges, and much, much more. And then I'll talk to Adam Dietrich from ReBlocks, a Denver, Colorado-based company that makes construction material from recycled plastic and who is now adding hemp into their composites. But first, a quick sponsor break. This episode is brought to you by Hemp Depot, where they're offering feminized high CBD Boax and Cherry HD seeds, seedlings, and clones, perfected over 5 years of iteration and testing. Hemp Depot stands behind what they sell, offering 50% financing and a THC guarantee against your crop going hot. So whether you're a first-time grower or a veteran, Hemp Depot is here for you. Call 844-436-7234 or go online at cbdseedco.com. All right, thanks for tuning in to today's show. This is episode 89. It's June 10th, 2020. We are nearly 4 months into the coronavirus pandemic here in the U.S. People are champing at the bit to open things up and get back to normal, whatever that is. I personally think it's too soon, and we'll see a second wave of the virus as people ignore the social distancing and mask-wearing recommendations, but we'll see. We're also about 2 weeks into the protests around the country and the world prompted by the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police. Masses of people are protesting the systemic racism in the justice system and police brutality, but that systemic racism isn't limited to the justice system or policing. It is in nearly all aspects of American life, including the hemp and cannabis space. So let me say this: yes, Black Lives Matter, and it's way past time to reimagine all of the systems in our society. All right, I just needed to say that on the record. All right, so it's June and planting is underway here in Pennsylvania. Just yesterday, I paid a brief and socially distant visit to Tasunka Farm Organics in Birch Runville, Pennsylvania. Last year, they grew about 7,000 CBD plants, but this year they're putting in 48,000 autoflowers. So they've got some in the ground, some in the greenhouse, and it was great to be away from my house for a little while, to be among the rolling hills of Chester County, out in the fresh air and sunshine, as Dale showed me around her hemp fields and the new greenhouse. In the coming weeks, we'll check back in with Dale and hear her story. But today, I'm excited to have Dr. Kander back on the show. I first spoke with him last summer. If you haven't heard that interview, please go back and listen. The episode is called The Smart Way to Integrate Hemp into Consumer and Industrial Products, published July 10th, 2019. Anyway, here we go. Dr. Ron Kander, welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the first time we spoke on the show was about 11 months ago. I met you through Judy Wick's Hemp Supply Chain Coalition. Yeah, so you've had a lot going on since then. Can you sort of reintroduce yourself for folks who didn't hear that interview and sort of catch us up on what's been going on?
Sure. So again, my name is Ron Kander. I'm an engineer by training. I have 2 or 3 hats I wear here at Thomas Jefferson University in Philly. First, I'm the dean of one of our colleges, and the college I'm dean of is the Canbar College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce, named after one of our alums, Maurice Canbar. Very strange college. I have the design majors, the engineering majors, and the business majors combined into a single college. So you can really think of us as a product design and development firm sitting inside of a university. So it's an interesting opportunity. And then the second hat I wear on the campus is the Associate Provost for Applied Research. So all the industry-facing applied research projects where we try to get our students and faculty involved in that prototyping, application, development of new technologies, I get to coordinate. So those are the 2 hats that I wear on campus and are the reasons why I ended up in this research area of products and services associated with industrial hemp.
Right. And so you are the leadership chair of sort of the new configuration of the Pennsylvania Hemp Steering Committee?
Right. So there's the Pennsylvania Industrial Hemp Steering Committee, and that has probably 40 to 50 members. Members being a word in quotes because there's no real membership associated with it. The meetings get called. If you want to come, you can come. It's an open event. So there's about 40 or 50 people that have been attending that meeting on a semi-regular basis. So it's quarterly. So Secretary Redding said that, managing a group that large is kind of difficult. And we didn't want it to just be everybody got together and talked and no actions occurred. So the idea became to form a leadership team inside of that steering committee that was selected from the members of the steering committee at large. And that was done at one of their last meetings. And people were able to nominate, either self-nominate or nominate others. And a team of 8 members were formed around 4 specific subcommittee topics that the steering committee at large wanted to address. And then the leadership asked me to chair that leadership team.
Okay.
So I'm going to be, and as an academic, I kind of don't have a dog in the fight, if you will. So I can be sort of an impartial chair of that leadership team and help them manage the steering committee at large around the 4 subcommittees.
So how did you get involved in the first place with the steering committee?
So I started attending the steering committee meetings when we started to do research projects around industrial hemp as a material, especially in the Pennsylvania area, and looking at how one could manufacture both consumer and industrial products from the hemp plant. There was interest in hemp as a material for CBD oils and some cannabis uses for both medicinal and recreational purposes. So there was some research going on at Thomas Jefferson in Center City on those parts of the plant. And we got involved then in looking at the engineering and design applications of the rest of the plant. And so I got involved on the research side as an engineer, sort of in the material science of the plant, the engineering processes to convert the plant into other material forms. How would those be incorporated into products? And how would you design products to take advantage of the properties of the material? And then how would you even design business models around new products that use hemp as a material? What's the sustainability? What's the economic supply chain look like? So from the engineering point of view, the systems involved in this new business intrigued me. And this goes back to the fact that I have design, engineering, and business majors. So all of those dimensions of the problem seemed to fit really well in my college. Right. And it was an opportunity to get students involved in a topic where all 3 disciplines were needed at the same time. So there was an educational driving force at first, and then that led us to realize that it's a really interesting research area and an economic development area too. Pennsylvania is really unique in the sense that we have, places like York County and Lancaster County where there's a history of growing this material. And then you're like literally right next to these large manufacturing bases and population bases like the Philadelphia region, within literally an hour or 2 from each other. So we have a local supply chain microcosm that could actually, it's a laboratory. We could research how you build up supply chains and implement them in this new industry, rediscovered industry. And Pennsylvania was a hotbed for this centuries ago, so it can still be again. So that's sort of how we got involved at the state level, because the state, once PA Department of Agriculture and PA Manufacturing got involved, we started to realize it was a place to do local supply chain manufacturing research too.
Okay. You mentioned there were 4 areas that the steering committee leadership team is broken up into. Can you talk about each one of those?
Sure. So the 4 subcommittees are farmer and processor education and outreach, supply chain and market development, research opportunities and needs, and policy and regulation. Those are the 4 areas that the steering committee itself decided to focus on.
Getting back to the altogether now Industrial Hemp Local Supply Chain Coalition, I know there's sort of like a set of values there. Do you think you're able to bring those values of the Local Supply Chain Coalition to the steering committee?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, there's members of the steering committee that are also members of the coalition. So there are overlaps of more than just me. And in fact, the Altogether Now group is having a hemp meeting in a few weeks, and one of the report outs there will be on this on the various subcommittees and the leadership team for the steering committee. So I think there's going to be a really open set of communication between the two groups, and both kind of serve the same purpose, because I mean they're both advisory groups to these folks in PA Department of Agriculture and the other parts of the Pennsylvania government, to do two things really: to be a conduit for communication in both directions. So what's happening in the industries and how can we get that information up to the state government as fast as possible? And what are the administrators in the state government thinking about in terms of policies and procedures that we can get down to the people on the ground as fast as possible? So the communication piece is really important in both directions. I think that both groups want to do that, and they want to advocate for how do you grow these industries in Pennsylvania in a way that keeps the money in Pennsylvania.
I talked to lots of people sort of in the hemp space, and a few months ago, when I heard that the steering committee was sort of being, reconfigured a little bit, I heard some stories about some out-of-state corporations that were trying to get on the committee. Is there some out-of-state money involved here?
So the steering committee really, like I said, it's an open group. So when the meetings are announced, anybody that would like to attend can attend.
Okay.
So there hasn't been any effort, as far as I know, to exclude anybody from coming and sitting in the meeting.
Right.
The few folks I know of that have come to those meetings, or even to the PA Summit, the Hemp Summit in Lancaster last year, were, I guess, looking to invest in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So, I mean, I assume that would be the primary reason. So I haven't personally looked at any way to exclude people from participating if they plan to do business in Pennsylvania.
Okay, fair enough. So you briefly mentioned some of the goals of the committee. Can you go a little further into other goals of the committee?
Sure. I mean, it's not too heavily developed yet. I mean, we had our first meeting. The mission and vision is really just to provide information to the industry and to provide information to the state government, and to facilitate action items from the subcommittees, so that we're not just a steering committee that meets and talks, but we actually have some concrete goals.
Okay.
That being said, where we are right now in that process is I've met with the various subcommittee leads a few weeks ago. They are in the process of recruiting, if you will, from the steering committee at large, the members that want to participate in specific subcommittees. So we've actually sent out a survey where steering committee members who have been at previous meetings can select the subcommittees that they're most interested in working with.
Okay.
And that'll give that group then a chance to collaboratively develop two things: a mission vision, but also then a set of concrete goals for the next 6 months to a year to 18 months. And so that each subcommittee then at the quarterly meetings of the steering committee can report on progress toward those goals. So that's what we're really trying to get to, versus the way the steering committee met in the past, which was, it was a good information sharing environment, but it really didn't have continuity from meeting to meeting in terms of having a set of goals that we were trying to advance the ball 5 yards each quarter,
Okay.
So a long answer, I'm sorry, but I don't feel like I could say that each of the subcommittees already has a goal, but the goal would be to talk through that at the July steering committee meeting.
All right. So the goal right now is for them to come up with some goals.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. What are some of the known challenges that the committee faces? And then are there any, I don't know, what unanticipated challenges? That might be a tough question to answer.
Yeah.
What don't you know?
Yeah. What do I know about the things I don't know? I would say that if you go down the 4 subcommittees, there's some obvious things that all of them have to deal with. So I think farmers and processors are struggling with the business model right now in terms of how do you integrate the farming and the processing, and how do you do that in a co-op environment? Do you do that by somebody vertically integrating through and doing it? Is it third party processors? What's the best business model? And I shouldn't even presume there's one, but what are the business models that may work? And I think that there are ambiguous regulations right now for where we're going to go over the next couple of years. So people are afraid to make longer term investments. So I think the investment strategy and the business model for the farmers and the processors is a big issue. For supply chain and market development, they really are in a catch-22 because it's very difficult to develop robust markets without a stable supply chain, and it's very difficult to build a supply chain without stable markets. So they're trying to look at what are the bootstrapping strategies. So are there, and you and I talked about this earlier, are there high value, small volume market opportunities that would let you jumpstart that supply chain so you can work at smaller volumes but still be profitable? Mm-hmm. And that would then let you stabilize a supply chain that could then let you attack larger markets later. Right. Ironically, last time we talked, I gave a hypothetical example of a friend of mine at Georgia Pacific. And I was saying how, he half jokingly said, show me a U.S. supply chain of 100 million pounds a year and we're in, right? Yeah. Well, you saw the news, right? Georgia Pacific just signed a deal with Canada.
Oh, I didn't see that.
For supplying hemp for some of their wood fiber products.
Okay.
So since they're ahead of us by 80 years, right? Or whatever. So, Canada has a lot more supply chain.
I think 20 years. I think they legalized it in the 90s.
Yeah, but they have a lot more supply chain stability than we do in the U.S. right now. So not too surprisingly, Georgia Pacific is going to where there's a stable supply chain. So, so that's, I think, an issue for that group. Research opportunities and needs. It's funny, that group has been probably the most active so far. And they've been looking at the word research both as a noun and a verb. So they think they can research opportunities. So that's the verb part. So they think that their subcommittee could actually actively research where the opportunities are. But then also they are defining research opportunities for members of the subcommittees and members of the steering committee at large. So they're trying to identify where the holes are. So this is where, like, personally, the PA manufacturing grant process, we connected that up to our efforts here, and we just secured 2 small research grants from PA manufacturing to actually look at local processing of hemp as a biomass into composite materials for 2 local regional manufacturing companies. So I think they're trying to make those kind of matches for research. How do you develop product lines that will then draw the supply chain? Right. And then the fourth group, the policy and regulation group, are the ones that are dealing with this issue of policy instability and regulation instability, and trying to, and this is where the communication channels will probably be most important, because we have the members of PA Department of Agriculture as ex officio members of the leadership team. So we can make sure that the voices of the farmers and the processors and the manufacturers get through to DOA, so that as state policies and even national policies and regulations are developed, they're not going to hinder the expansion of this industry in the region.
So how will, like, regular people see the effects of this committee? How will we know it's working?
That's a very good question. One of the things that we talked about at the first leadership team meeting actually was we need to make sure we have a communication channel out to the public at large. So, through literally places like, the Lancaster Farming and other public media places, our own website, our own Facebook page, whatever the leadership team decides on. But we have to have a way to communicate out to the population at large, first of all, which we don't have yet. And so that's the first thing, is people should actually hear from us. So if they hear from us, they'll know that things are happening. But also, I think you if you start seeing targeted investment, I think that's the best thing we can do, because the state can't do it by itself. Companies can't do it by themselves. But if we work as a group on all four of these areas, you should start to see jobs and investment in the supporting industries starting to show up in the state, and hopefully in the state at a little higher rate than you see it at our competing in other competing states and regions.
So the question I always ask guests is about the short end of the stick. What will the steering committee be doing to ensure farmers aren't getting the short end of the stick? Because I still hear stories about farmers who haven't gotten paid from last year's harvest.
Yeah. And I appreciate that a lot, and I understand that, and that's where Judy's heart is too. I think that this is where thinking of this as a system and thinking about it from a systems point of view is really the only way to ensure that. Because if you short any person in this chain for short-term gain, you have to understand that you're damaging the long-term stability and robustness of the supply chain. And so you really are hurting yourself. So this is really a team sport. And I'm a huge baseball fan. And the thing I love about baseball is that you have to perform as a team. And usually the team that wins the World Series is not the team that had all the best players. Because baseball is not the kind of game where one superstar can dominate the game like maybe basketball can. Mm-hmm. So this is truly a team sport. And unless everybody participates in it and everybody's ready to make a play, you can't win. So, I think that the best we can do is this group has members from the farming community. This group has members from the supply chain. We have lawyers, we have financiers, we have universities. So I think that if they're talking to each other and they know each other and they build relationships together, there's less of a chance of somebody trying to take more than their fair share out of this system as we move it forward. It's all relationships.
How does the steering committee plan to address sort of the social injustice and inequality in the hemp and cannabis space? Does the industry bear some responsibility? Communities of color have been decimated by systematically racist policing and drug laws and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there diversity on the leadership team?
Yes, there is. There is diversity on the leadership team and in the steering committee at large. And this is another place where having groups like All Together Now PA as active members of the steering committee is valuable, because they understand that. In fact, one of the two grants that I received to work on the manufacturing is a small African-American owned company, and the other one is a small woman owned company. So, we are trying in our own actions. Those are small, mm-hmm. but, doing small steps add up to big steps. Right. So I think that everybody has to keep in mind that you have to be as inclusive as possible. If this industry isn't diverse, it's not going to be sustainable.
Right. I've heard some sort of complain about the Pennsylvania hemp program, like with the acreage limits, the minimums and the indoor grow, and it sort of seemed to really limit people in urban communities from growing. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was brought up actually as one of the issues that the Policy and Regulation Subcommittee wanted to address. And you're right, I think that's a great example of an unintended consequence of a policy and where systems thinking has to come in, because some of those limits and spacings and densities, they weren't put in, I would assume those weren't done to purposely exclude urban farming, but in retrospect, they do disadvantage you from being able to do things in an urban environment. So clearly those have to be modified. And I think getting that information up to decision makers in an unbiased way is kind of the thing that the leadership team could do.
How is the pandemic affecting the work you're doing, one at Jefferson and two with the steering committee?
Yeah, it's made a big difference, obviously. I think we don't even use the phrase new normal anymore. We use the phrase next normal, because it seems like we're going to be disruption after disruption after disruption for the next few years. I was just putting together, digress for a second, I was just putting together some statements for our graduation ceremony, which is happening on the 12th of July, virtually. And I pointed out as I was writing that these undergraduates, especially that are graduating, are early 20s. Basically, they've been alive through this century. And I started to list the disruptions that have happened over the last 20 years, starting with 9/11 and going through financial things and epidemics and natural disasters and man-made disasters, and they've lived through nothing but disruptions. And so I think we're just always looking to what the next normal is. So we've had to adapt. We've had to change the way we do business at the university. We've had to change the way we do business as a committee. I don't even know that it's going to be this way in 6 months. Who knows? So it has disrupted what we do. I don't think it's made us more or less effective. It's made us just different. There's some things about teaching online, for example, that are actually superior to being in classrooms.
Like what?
So for example, let's imagine that we lived in a world where the only thing that had ever developed was online education. And you came up with the idea of, let's put everybody together in a room and teach live, right? Think of all the complaints people would have. Well, wait a minute, now I've got to drive somewhere and park and then come back, so I'm going to lose 2 hours to attend a class. What if I'm sick? I miss the class. I don't get to watch it again. I don't have it on tape. I don't have it videotaped. I can't see it later on. Right. If we have a class discussion, nobody's recording it, so nobody can grade it and assess whether everybody participated or not. And you can go on and on with the things that wouldn't, quote unquote, wouldn't work if we tend to do it live. Not to mention, if one person gets sick and comes in with a cold, then everybody ends up with a cold. So I think that there's advantages because of the flexibility, especially when you're talking about students that might be working, students that have small children at home. I have to miss today's lecture, but I can watch it tonight at 10 o'clock when the kids are in school, in bed. And I don't have to not get my degree now because I can take classes. So I think the same thing's going to happen with these committees. We had 100% attendance at the first leadership team meeting because it was done over Zoom.
Right.
And nobody had to worry about, could they leave home? Did they have to travel? And I guarantee you, if this meeting had to occur in person somewhere, somebody couldn't have traveled to meet it. Yeah. So I think that it just means we're doing our job differently, and planning and adapting is again the way you think in systems. Yeah. So that's what I've taken from this. I'm always accused of being too much of an optimist, but humans are smart, and we'll do things differently. It's a pain. Restaurants will figure out a way to run.
Yep.
Farms will figure out a way to run. Processing plants will figure out a way to run. Product designers will figure out a way to run. So it'll just be fun to watch it happen.
How about your students who are in like a lab and they're in that college space with all the equipment that they need to do their testing or whatever your engineering students do? How do you do that?
So we are intending at Jefferson to be on ground in August when classes start. The way we're doing that is that even if students are in the dorms, and by the way, that's another issue because doubles now become singles, quads now become doubles because you can't overpack people into the spaces. So we're already leasing apartments and apartment blocks around our campus so that we can spread our students out less densely. But even if you're on campus or near campus in an apartment, you will take some of your classes online. Mm-hmm. The didactic part of your classes, so the lectures, can be taken on Zoom. But then that means that we can now schedule the labs and studios less densely because there'll be less people on campus at any one time. So if a studio space or a laboratory held 20 people, maybe now 10 of them come in and do their experiments from 10 o'clock to noon, and then the other 10 come in at noon to 2. And, so maybe that means we run some labs at night or on the weekends. But so we just lower the density, remain physical distancing, use proper PPE, put in some aggressive cleaning policies, but we can still run studios, labs, and shops just at lower densities. So I think we can still have the same experience in a little bit of a hybrid way.
Okay. So I want to test your theory of you being too much of an optimist. What are some of your silver linings that are going to come out of this pandemic and then these crises and protests and just sort of the crazy state of the world right now?
That's a really good question. So I think that, oh, wow, that's a great question. Being an optimist, I think that every time, what's funny, I should say I'm not as much of an optimist as I claim I am, because every time we have a major disruption like this, we claim we're going to get better and we get a little bit better, but then we regress. Every time, going back as far as you want to go in history, right?
Yep.
When something happens, the 1920s, we had the Great Depression, and everybody was going to be more fiscally responsible after that. And we were for about 40 or 50 years, and then we kind of relax, and then we have another one, right? I think the same thing happens with human rights. We get excited and rightfully outraged when something happens and you see some short-term change, but then people start to relax. This one feels a little different. This one feels a little bit more like, people are tired of the repetitiveness of this happening over and over again. So I think that we are going to see a generation of people, as I mentioned, that have been through 20 years of disruption, who are now going to enter the workforce. They're going to enter politics. They're going to enter public office. They're going to enter private industry. And they're going to not be satisfied with just thoughts and prayers as the response to every time there's a disruption. I think they're going to demand action and take it, because they'll start to be in positions of leadership. So, being an academic, I have to say that I think the way you make these changes long-term is with humans, is if we can educate people and empower them to be in leadership positions, then they can start making the change. So I'm hoping that, that's a Gandhi phrase, right? Be the change. So being the change is probably the best silver lining outcome. I'm hoping that everybody who has protested in the last 2 weeks goes and votes, goes and joins their local community boards, maybe runs for office in the next few years as they get older, and don't just protest about the changes, go make them.
Dr. Ron Kander, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Is there anything else you want to tell us about your work with hemp or your work with the steering committee?
I did want to let your listeners know that the steering committee is an open meeting, as I said. So I will make sure that you have all the dates of meetings coming up, and that you can publicize those yourself, Eric, and
Absolutely.
Asking your readers and listeners to do the same. Pass the word and get hold of me personally if they have a question or they want to participate in one of the subcommittees. Just let me know, and I assume you'll be able to put my contact information up on the site, and that's the best thing is I don't bite. I'm more than willing to talk to people and get input from folks. So that's the biggest thing I want people to know, is we want to include as many people as are interested.
All right, that's Dr. Ron Kander from Jefferson University, and also from the Pennsylvania Hemp Steering Committee. Next up, we'll talk to Adam Dietrich from ReBlocks, a Denver, Colorado company that uses recycled plastic to make building materials, and now they are incorporating hemp into that process. Here we go. Adam Dietrich, welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. Could you give us a little introduction?
Of course. Yeah. My name's Adam Dietrich, and I'm one of the owners of ReBlocks company, which is out of Denver, Colorado. We are a building materials company and manufacturer that utilizes category 1 through 7 landfill plastics to formulate our building blocks, are interlocking designed so that you can utilize a rubber mallet to get them into place. So we've been utilizing these for about 8 years in South America as tiny homes and small storage structural build outs. So to implement this in North America.
Okay. So is it sort of like the shape and size of a cinder block, or like a giant Lego, or how How does it work?
Yeah, it's about the same length as a cinder block, but the width is only 2 to 4 inches wide. So we've got two different thickness variations of the block for different application purposes. So definitely has the length, but just a thinner block, fully created out of 100% plastic. So there's no air bubbles or any type of filler, just full on pure plastic blocks.
Okay. Now, are you reclaiming the plastic at landfills, or are you getting it from recycling companies?
Great question. We have multiple different ways to acquire the trash. We're able to work specifically with landfills, but as well, we can work with, Denver as an example. The city, they've been offering offloads of plastic waste where they would actually pay you a bit to take a ton at a time away. So we've been looking, and utilizing various routes, but down the road, and really when we get this consistent or full project, we'd like to really take on rural landfills as our initial targets. They're the ones that are taking on a lot more of the crisis right now of the stress of just over capacity. They don't have room to expand like some larger landfills. So that's what we would like to start on.
You're using hemp now. Can you talk about your use of hemp?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that came around based on the last 4 years of my just work. I've been doing a lot of consulting for land development owners. And so that was my entry to industrial hemp. We were finding ways in which we can create beneficial use to adjudicate water rights. And, you need to provide documentation of what you're going to be doing with that land before you can move that water. And so industrial hemp provided us with a nice opportunity to take on a larger land space based on the, not ease, but the easier process in which it is to cultivate industrial hemp versus CBD. And it provided me with, a couple of years of just a chance to really fully understand industrial hemp. And during that time, it took me down a lot of rabbit holes where I learned quite a bit in regards to the functionality and the material makeup of the stalk itself. And so based on that experience and my education as I was working with that land development project, I found that industrial hemp, as it was seen, back before it was created as a illegal product, very similar to marijuana, it was, something that was definitely a threat to every industry based on the versatility and the makeup of the entire plant. So it was a definite eye opener for me, but also something that, I felt the entire world was getting cheated out of. So it's just a nice place where we are now, where we can really put together some processes to hopefully get this industry up on its feet, through quality and transparency, outlooks. And so that's kind of where we began. I was introduced to ReBlocks and my business partner, Lewis Hard, based on my experience with industrial hemp. And so, it was just a perfect relationship. We've now been in business together, Lewis and I, for over a year, but we've created prototypes for the, industrial hemp composite block, because right now what we're doing is based on just the issues of infrastructure or lack thereof. We're trying to kind of work backwards. So we've got our final product, which is the hemp composite block. It's currently has about 20% hemp inside the block, which reduces the overall weight by about 15%. But we're, further down the road, our large focus will be the additional innovative advancements of the material itself from the plant. And so it's something where we're at a nice kind of base where we can incorporate the plant into the block now. We can create a commodity opportunity and provide another outlet for the farmer. But really my focus would be when we can get to conductive opportunities within this material so that we can look to provide these blocks with an off-grid capability where they be conductive and pretty much charge the entire building themselves. And so it's something where it's a long road, but the blocks right now are extremely functional for what we need them to be. And moving forward with the type of efficiency that I think is coming around based on the process that we've created. We're taking the plant, breaking it down to the 5 raw materials. We only need some of those raw materials, so we're ensuring that obviously we're getting that to our other hemp brands within our networks.
So what parts of the plant are you using? I mean, this isn't like a hempcrete, hemp lime situation. You're actually making sort of a composite, almost like a plastic.
This is very different. This is something that it's taking the plastics, and what we do is we're taking complete raw plastic, we're grinding it down, we're washing it, we're bringing it back to a pelletized form after we're incorporating the stock of the plant. And so we're milling the CBD stalks down to a powder, and that's being incorporated into our formula. And so the benefit now is that we can use the CBD stock, so we're opening the door to current farmers that are sitting on a massive amount of inventory.
Right.
So we want to be able to create those relationships with those farmers and then offer opportunity down the road for new genetics to come in and really take on a focus of these building materials. And that's going to be through fiber genetics. So currently, it's great that we know we can use the CBD plant because there's an abundance of it out there. But for that further tensile strength and for the increased amount of volume that we're looking for, we're really going to need to focus our attention here on some new genetics so that we can get longer stalks, thicker stalks, and take advantage of, a way in which we can, really create 50,000 plus products from just the waste that's currently sitting on land that farmers are having to pay for. So
in Colorado, there's not many fiber growers out there, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, you've got a couple of groups that are doing some research and development. They're doing some more grain style grow. You've got some multi-purpose genetics. That's the issue that we're seeing now is that you really want to get into locating those genetics, but at the same time, you have to have a market for it. And so that's the nice opportunity with the block is that it will provide us, the incorporation of the herd, the incorporation of the fiber, but, offering that at a level that current farmers can actually jump in and test the waters here while we're still building up this product. But through my years, I was introduced to a company out of Nepal. Their company name is Stemp Apparel. And so the owner and founder, Vincent Shreshla, he is the creative director as well, but they are a family that's lived in Nepal for generations. They've been working with the regions that are growing industrial hemp for fiber application. And those regions have been growing for thousands of years. And so we have partnered so that we can benefit from the information that they're gathering in regards to their genetics based on the climates that we have, and the comparisons of elevation between Nepal and Colorado. And so we can utilize the genetics and really benefit from high altitude cultivation to achieve a higher tensile strength. And that will just further allow us to advance this building block into some, new innovation that can take us to that conductive characteristic and application, opportunities.
Does adding hemp into it sort of decrease the life of the plastic? I mean, does it make it, more biodegradable, or how does that work?
Great question. Yeah, what we are working through is looking into that longevity. Obviously, man-made plastics are here to stay. Scientists have estimated between 200 and 450 years, before this stuff actually breaks down. And so utilizing the plastics as a majority of the material within the block helps to solidify the block strength. We dry the powder to the lowest moisture level possible to ensure that there's not any expansion happening within that block that would open up any air bubbles. But from what we've found through the incorporation of the plastic and the industrial hemp at a powder form, is that it's keeping the overall strength of the block because the mixture within that plastic. But we need a lot more studies on long term. There's some benefits that we're looking in of even taking the material from the plant and going through a process that would literally remove the lignin and the hemicellulose from the material. So it's a process that's getting down to that graphene level where it forms a crystallized material of leftovers. So really just cooking out everything else from the plant and leaving behind carbon. And that carbon can be incorporated into the block as well. Similar process, but just removing some of those additional materials that might cause that breakdown. Because the lignin and the hemicellulose, those are the main indicators for the breakdown and how the moisture level within those two, lignin and hemicellulose. So that's what we're also trying to focus down on, is to get into this process is called hydrothermal synthesis. So it dissolves the lignin and the hemicellulose.
Hydrothermal synthesis. Okay. This reminds me a little bit about what our previous guest, Dr. Ron Kander, was talking about when I interviewed him the first time last summer. He's talking about setting up like a refinery system where, the plant itself is valuable because it can be broken down into so many different components and used by so many different, industries. And that's fascinating.
I loved his talk. Yeah, his talk was fantastic. And that was one that really kind of just confirmed for me that, this plant is that type of opportunity. And it really is an oil refinery opportunity, because what you can do is really provide the outlet for the farmer within a regional capacity so that, these raw materials can be processed down to a position where, you've got a lot of different brands really just kind of within those networks able to take that additional raw material off your hand once you're already to a position where it's at that higher price point. And through refinement, within the decortication, through also some additional, techniques that are utilized in Colorado. We got a great company out here. They're called Pure Hemp Technology. So, really in Colorado, we're trying to create a community where we can, provide our farmers with as many outlets as possible for their plants, doing so within a way that we can all share a bit of that overhead cost. Because looking at, farmers that adopted CBD right away, some of those farmers had to put $1 million into their farms just to get it up to date with the equipment and necessary cultivation, materials. But when you're looking at something where a collaborative attempt can be made, the initial process of growing, that's a similar process that the farmer knows. But once you get that harvested, you really want to be able to remove the entire supply from the farmer's hand, because it really just clogs up the entire chain for them. Right. And that's what we've seen this year. I mean, you've got a lot of farmers just sitting on hundreds of pounds, millions of pounds of stock biomass. And so, this is just a nice opportunity for the state of Colorado to hope to set a standard, provide an example that can be carbon copied in this type of refinement, model.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to ask that. Does this model work for other plastic companies? Could plastic companies, let's say here in Pennsylvania, gather the recycled materials from farmers and start using it in their plastic?
Yeah, 100%. And that's agricultural industry is massive in plastic. You just have a lot of plastic. And so the way in which we've seen this is a very circular model. you can really take everything in which the farmers have utilized, regrind it for the next year. And that's what we've been focusing on as well, because when you're looking at the farming community, cash on hand is not something that is always prominent. And so providing farmers with ways in which we can replace their timber with recycled plastics, mixed with industrial hemp, anything to work away from timber rot. This is going to help in every state. And looking at Pennsylvania and the East Coast with humidity levels and moisture levels, working away from timber is going to be something that allows us to really, one, take the mundane activities away from that farmer, but two, it's working away from additional issues that we're seeing within the home, which is the dirty home syndrome, where you have massive amounts of chemicals, massive amounts of molds accumulating within these homes based on moisture levels, and no way for the actual fungal buildup to be mitigated. And so, there's so many different and fantastic opportunities with industrial hemp to benefit our communities. And we're trying to start with our farming communities, but then expand out within those rural towns, because with the regional processing and the refinement, manufacturing, distribution, that brings a lot of jobs to the table. And if we can do this in a regional setting, then we can provide every level of job within that one region, so that people don't have to continuously travel to find that new job. And that's an issue here in Colorado. We're very pinpoint to either oil and gas. We've got a lot of cattle. We do have technology. We've got a lot of different jobs, but when you look at some smaller towns, we're very pinpointed into a certain industry. And Greeley, Colorado is one of those, where Greeley, it's about an hour north of Denver. They're very high into cattle raising, but the issues of COVID have then halted the processing plants for those cattle. And so It's a massive chain of events that has completely slowed down the economy. And when your city is really, supported by that one industry alone, really come to a halt quite quickly. And so really our main focus here is to try to revitalize some of these towns and change the nomenclature of who they are and what they do, because unfortunately Greeley has just kind of become the slower town to evolve, and we really want to just help utilize industrial hemp to push it to that next level, because it has a fabulous town around it, wonderful community, and some really, really nice, so just showing how to provide new opportunities through this crop.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the many promises of hemp is that, the idea of building local supply chains and having communities thrive, all the way from the farmers to the manufacturers and then out to consumers. And in the face of this pandemic, where we see these global supply chains are just weak and then shut down because of this stuff, if you had these local supply chains, you wouldn't have such a disruption to the economy.
Absolutely. In the main purpose of this refinement plant and what we're trying to create as the base is the plastics manufacturing. And that is what opens the door to the versatility of final end products. My business partner, Lewis Hard, he's been in plastics for the last 42 years. He's owned 2 different companies here in Denver. And so the great thing with us is we are going to be utilizing extrusion plastic molding. And so that's going to help us to create our building blocks, our supportive structural posts. But it opens the door to a multitude of other final applications based on additional molds that we can bring to the table. So having the pelletized composite hemp plastic there at our hands, we can really provide other smaller hemp companies or even other plastics companies the opportunity of incorporating that raw material and utilizing our machinery their machinery. The best part about it is that this plastic, even with the industrial hemp added in, works through any traditional plastics manufacturing machinery. So you don't have any issues of having to go out and purchase that new machinery. And so we really want to utilize that as the basis of the versatility of this plant, but also getting it out to the masses through a lot of single-use products, and that's what you're seeing a lot with plastics anyway, is those single-use products.
Yeah. Huh. Well, this sounds amazing. Is there a place online where people can see some examples?
Yes, absolutely. So what we'll have examples of on our website is the homes that have been built in South America, as well as our booth that we had at the Western Stock Show here in Denver in January.
Okay.
That website is www.ReBlocksCo.com. And so that will, be just a landing page for you. It's the issue that we're finding now is, COVID really put a hamper on our momentum. In January, we had the Western Stock Show. It was absolutely fantastic. There's 700,000 people come through that show every year. And right after that, we just kind of took that halt with COVID. And so, looking at ways in which we can get back into the communities and really show that these blocks can be beneficial even in times of crisis like this. We just want to make sure that this is something that can be beneficial for the long term. So that's a website that we can obviously show those examples, but please, if anybody has any additional questions or looking for ways in which we can create other opportunities out of these raw materials, our email address is reblocksinfo@gmail.com. And we'd be more than happy to start up some conversations and see how we can work towards some additional end uses. Our major goal here is just to ensure that any way to create sustainable living is right at the tips of our fingers. There shouldn't be any issue of mining for additional resources when we're sitting on 8.3 billion tons of man-made plastics.
All right. I'll put those links up on the show page for this episode. Adam Dietrich, it's great to talk to you. It's really a fantastic look into what you guys are doing out there.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. We really appreciate the time and just excited to be able to introduce this type of material and this type of application to the public.
All right, that's the show. Thanks for listening. My name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com. Get yourself a subscription, too. It's worth its weight in gold. Go to lancasterfarming.com/podcast deal for a subscription deal. Anyway, I would love your feedback. Email me, podcast@lancasterfarming.com. Would love to hear story ideas. I would love to hear from potential sponsors of the show. If you like what we're doing, let me know. Write us a review. Share it with a friend, whatever. All right, I do appreciate you listening. I hope you stay well, stay safe, and good luck with your planting. Good luck with everything. All right, until next time, I'll see you in the newspaper. This episode of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast, episode 89, is copyright 2020 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communication family. Today's show was written, recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.
Industrial hemp.